In this video, we're going to go ahead and cover materials, what they are, what we use them for, and how they interact with light and things like that. Let's go ahead and get started. One of the things you may have ran into up to this point is I've forgotten to save our map. So we might want to make sure our map is saved. If you haven't done that yet, make a new folder in your content and call it maps. Go ahead and if you just hit File Save, it's going to go and ask you to save your map because it's unsaved. I've named ours My Map, so I know it's My Map. That's something you should actually be doing between each video. I've just gotten lucky and nothing has crashed, so let's go ahead and save to prevent everything from having issues. Materials. Materials are the way that you can see things. This item right here, for example, actually technically has a material assigned to it. It says nothing here, but the component itself does actually have a world grid material assigned to it. These walls, since we've brought them in as a pre-built item, Epic has already supplied them with their own wall material. And we have things like, technically the sky has a material applied to it, and things like that. Let's go ahead and create our own material. If we go into our starter content, and we go down to materials, we're going to go ahead and find a bunch of pre-built materials. These will be good because we can cover some of the more extreme examples, and then we can also steal some of these for ours. Let me open up the water shader. We're going to go to water, ocean, and open it up onto our screen. And we're going to zoom out to see this giant monstrosity. This is actually one of the smaller materials with some more complicated things in it. It has some texture panning and some movement, and it basically tries to simulate like an ocean effect. This is not going to be your common use for a material. Your common use for material will be applying your textures, your diffuse, your normal map, your diffuse/albedo, normal maps, and other things like that. And we're going to cover that here now. Let's go ahead and close this down. And we're going to use the basic wall texture as a starting. If we were to take this basic wall, drag it over, actually, let's go into my content, add a new folder called materials. Now we can go back to the starter basic wall and drag it over. We'll do copy here. The reason we want to do this is later on down the road, we may want to clean up this project, get rid of things we don't use anymore. And if we have our content intermingled with the starter content, it may be a little more difficult. If we make a copy, we can call this one our own. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and add the word mine to the end of it. Now we have our basic wall texture, and it's called mine. We double click to open it up, we will see a very simple basic material. This giant node on the right is our output. Everything else to the left of it is our input. If we want a color, well, we've just plugged in a node that gives us color. If we want it to be rough, well, we plugged in a value to determine how rough it is. All of the details of our material output nodes and our parameters, those are covered separately. As this is our intro video, we're going to cover the basics, slap a texture onto a new material we're going to make, and make a floor, wall, and some other basic stuff. Let's change this up a little bit. We'll show you how easy it is. We have our color here. If I was to double click on it, we get a color picker. I want a color that's more white, so we'll change it to more white. I want something a little less rough, a little more shiny, maybe plasticky, maybe new paint. We have our roughness value. In our details panel, it's set to 0.640708. And let's make it 0.3. Roughness is how rough. 0, not rough. 1, really rough. By dropping it to 0.3, we've made it less rough. It is always important when you play with materials to apply. If you don't apply, it may look different, but the material itself isn't saved and it will not make any change to the actual world itself. Let's grab this wall here, grab our basic wall texture and drop it on. And there we go. We've applied our new wall material to that wall. We could always grab this one. Over here we have materials and drop it. Or we could go to here, click on our drop down, and then find our material, which is here. And we now have 3 different ways of applying it. Or, you know what? We can click here. There's a little arrow here. Use selected asset from the content browser. Select that, click here, and now we've got 4 different ways of applying the material. Let's go ahead and select our other walls. Oops. And apply. And we now have that nice wall texture around the entire room. We could do the same over here, like here, here, and here. And we could even do these ones. Now keep in mind, this is just the way I'm doing it. Feel free to use the browsers to do the same thing. I'm just control clicking and selecting all of my individual walls. And now we've gone in and changed all of our walls to white. Now the nice part about using materials is, let's say I like this, but I don't know, it's too shiny. We can go back into the material. We'll change our roughness to 0.4 and apply. It's going to go ahead and recompile the shaders, figure out how everything works. Once it's done, it's going to replace them with our new value. And of course, anything that used that material is going to be changed. Now, you'll notice we have a nice white look. And we have a nice yellowish white look. But it's the same material. Well, the material is being affected by our lights. Our lights have this slightly off-white beige color. And the material is set to display this color with this roughness, and it's going to absorb the light and it's going to change the color. Your lights are going to interact with materials, and with the way the material system is designed in Unreal Engine 4, you should design your materials to be realistic. So that way when your lights affect them, they affect them realistically. Unreal Engine 4 uses a PBR, or physically based rendering engine. If you tell it, okay, I have gold. Now gold has a certain metallic value, a certain roughness value, and it has a certain color. If you were to recreate these things accurately, and then you put this into your scene, it's going to be gold, and it's going to have the material properties of gold. So if you put a white light near it, it's going to reflect back a little bit of white. It's going to have some reflectance property. It's got a little bit of roughness, and it's going to look gold. But if you were to take a red light, you're still going to get your gold highlights and your gold tint. But it's going to be more red because the metal is going to reflect back a little bit of red. So keep that in mind when you're authoring content for the engine. You make it realistic, and then you set everything up realistically, and you have a realistic result. This is, of course, assuming you want a realistic result. If you go for a stylized result, you're going to change it appropriately. Let's add in a floor. We're going to create a floor by scratch this time. We're going to go right click, material, and we'll call this one M. M floor, why not? And we'll call it floor. We'll open it up and we'll have our basic floor, which, as you can see here, has nothing. Now, even though we have nothing plugged in, we still have values. Everything is going to have a default value. You can't see it in here, but if you go to the documentation, it will let you know. Like, for example, you might have 0.5 for your default metallic value. Roughness maybe 0.2 or something like that. You have default values. That's why your base color is black. Our default value for base color is going to be 0, no color, black. Let's look through our content browser and see if we can find something that would be fun for a floor. I want something that's going to be maybe like a concrete or something like that. We have the stuff that came with the engine, our starter content, and we could go to textures and we could look through all of our textures. But what if there's stuff in other places? Well, we can use our filters on our content browser. Up here in your searchy thing is our filter section with a ton of options. We want to find textures. When you do that, you're going to find textures now highlighted, and only textures will show up in your browser. If I was to go to maps, oh no, where did our map go? Well, no results, check your filter. If I uncheck this, you'll find here's my map. If I check it again, well, no map because we're only looking at textures. The nice thing about this is it will search through children. So if I click on content, all of the content through all of these folders will be shown here. If I clicked on here or here, it'll of course go down. So it's nice you could do textures, boom, all the content. So let's find something that would work for me. I think there is well, actually, you know, these are hard to see. I would like to zoom in. We can go to view options and zoom in. Here's our size. Or my preferred way, control. Hold down control, zoom in or out with the mouse wheel, and we now get a little bit better display. Now that we have something bigger, let's see if we can find something. Oh, that's the concrete's kind of cool. Let's see. Wood might be nice. A brick. Stone. I wonder what the stone would look like. So let's see what this stone looks like. We'll look and we'll find a few different things. Normal naming conventions are going to have an appendix, a suffix, at the end of them to determine what it is. A D for a diffuse texture, N for a normal map. You might have M for a mask, for example. And you can have various different things. Let's go ahead and take our stone here and select it and go back into our material. We have our floor material here. Now we need to get this in here somehow. Now you can take and you can drag this and we could drop it and it's going to go and make a texture sample and it's going to load it up. But let's say you want to be able to make a texture sample and you don't actually know how to do it without dragging and dropping. Like we want to add a normal map. Well, if you click the T key and hold it down on your keyboard, it's going to say, I want to create a texture. Now when you click your mouse, it's going to create a texture sample wherever you click your mouse. Now the nice thing is, if you have something selected in here, a texture, it's going to go ahead and create it with that texture selected. If we don't, for example, it's going to create it with nothing. We're going to create it with nothing to show. You can also access any of those things here or in your palette. If we were to look down here, texture sample is a T. The simplest material is going to consist of a color. It's going to be like our wall material if we go into here, where we just have a color. Our next simplest is going to consist of a texture. Now, to do the texture, you pull in a texture sample, and then we would wire it up. So in this case, I have a texture sample of this brick. I want my colors to go into the base color, and then I wait, it'll compile, and there we go. I now have a texture I can assign, a material with this texture that I can assign to something. I'll hit apply, I'll wait, I'll take my floor and drop it onto my floor, and there we go. We have a nice little stone floor. It's a little flat, it's a little more reflective than I want, and those are the settings we can adjust. Let's go ahead and go back into our floor, and we're going to add a normal map. If we look in here, our texture sample is called brick cut stone. We go into here, we type in brick, we're going to find all of our choices for brick. And here's a brick cut stone N. N is a normal map. It's going to bring it in. It's going to be this really blue funky color. But we plug it into our normal and it gives us a little bit of fake depth. We'll apply it. We'll go back out. We'll wait for it to compile again and apply. And you'll notice we now have this kind of like depth. You can actually see based on the reflections, it's giving it a little bit of a physical look. Still a little too shiny for me. Really simple. What we're going to want to do is we're going to adjust the roughness. You have, I want to say, 4 primary nodes that you're going to play with when you're playing with materials. You have your texture, which is accessed by T. And then you have your scalars. You have a scalar 1, which is a float or a single number. A scalar 2, which is technically a vector or 2 numbers, X and a Y, or an R and a G. And then you have a scalar 3, which is your XYZ, or RGB, which is technically a color. Now our roughness takes a value between 0 and 1. 0, not rough. 1, super rough. We can go in here and look for our values right here. We're going to find our vectors, constant 2, 3, and 4. Or if we find in here somewhere, it should find scalar hiding in here. There we go. A constant is what it's called. Constant, constant 2, constant 3, and constant 4. If you notice, these are done 1, 2, 3, and 4. Super simple. Just like the way we made a texture. Hold down 1, click, we now have a 1. Hold down 2, click, we have 2, 3, click, 3, 4, click, 4. So if you want something with 4 values, 3, 2, or 1, you just hold down the number and click. You can drag. Go for it. No reason you can't drag. You can right click, type in constant, and you can click and do it that way as well. Since these are the most common ones, they have shortcuts, and that is the normal way you'll access these very quickly and efficiently. So let's make ourselves a rougher texture. I'll hold down 1 and drag it in. I'll connect this to roughness, and I want something like, let's say, 0.6. Remember, it's a 0 to 1 value. 0.6 is going to give me something about halfway rough. Come back out, and look, now you've got a little bit less shiny. Got a little bit more rougher, and it's doing what I want. Specular is where we're getting some of our reflections from. So I'm going to go ahead and do 0 and apply. We'll wait for this to come in. And you'll notice now we have a lot less. We have none of that specular glow. Now we still have one other thing that's still technically there. We have our metallic value. Remember how I said there are default values for all of this. Now I don't want any metal in this. I actually do want a little bit of specular. We'll go with like 0.3. And I want it fairly rough with 0.6. I'll go ahead and apply this and wait, and it's going to give us a floor. And there we go. Now it might be a little too specular. Let's hit play and see what happens. You know, that's not too bad. We can get a little bit of the light coming in and showing reflective based on the looks. You know, that's not bad. We're going to go ahead and we're going to use this. I also think if I walk over here, I'm probably going to walk through the wall. Yeah, we need to fix the collision for the wall. Let's go and do that right now. As you can see, converting things over, forgetting collision, very common. Add box collision, save, go back in, and now you notice we collide and the camera collides. There we go. Okay. So we've got a material for the floor. Let's go ahead and apply it over here. We'll just click here. Floor, apply, play, and there we go. Now we have our floor. Now it looks a little bit too tiled for me. Tiled means if you're looking at it, you can kind of see a little bit of a repetitive texture. That's just based on the size of our texture that we're bringing in and the size of this. We have some more nodes that allow us to play with things, and I'm going to show you one of them that's very common. It's called the texture coordinate, and it's right here called texture coordinate. This basically refers to if you're looking at this item and you have your UVs, and you have 0 to 1 for your UV channels. This is 0. 0 would be here to 1. I think it's 0 down here to 1. So basically, it's going to stretch it based on the size of your UVs. If you have very large UVs, your texture may look very stretched. If you have very small UVs, your texture may look condensed. But it has no way of knowing how you want to look unless you design your model properly. And as you noticed here, we've just been randomly throwing in stuff and hoping it'll work. But the nice thing is you have ways of adjusting things inside your material. We have our texture coordinate, and that's basically set up, if we look at our little parameters here, tiling of 0 for the coordinate, 1 for the tiling U, and 1 for the tiling V. So your X and your Y, your U and your V. We're going to tell it to tile once. If we were to plug this in to where it says UVs, well, nothing's going to happen. Because by default, we use 1, and by default, well, I've told to use 1. Now, if we change this, let's say 2 and 2, we're going to adjust the scaling. And what we're going to end up getting is, once I hit apply and come back in here, we're going to get actually a smaller looking texture. It's going to basically, instead of doing one of them across, it's going to have two of them across. So we get a much more detailed ground. But of course, you can really see it's tiling. I actually want to go in the opposite direction. I'm going to do this something like 0.5 to make a smaller. So that way only half of my texture is going to be shown. We're going to go ahead and see what this looks like. And now we get a much, much bigger look. Now, they're much bigger bricks, but you can't see as easily that you have tiling back and forth. And I'm going to go and use this. This is all preference. When you're properly working on things, you're going to go ahead and want to adjust your mesh to fit your texture to fit your mesh properly. In our case, we're using default stuff and we're playing with it to make it look good enough. And you know what? That's not bad. That's a nice little floor. It's got a little bit of an effect to it. Got a little bit of a light glow if we're hitting the angle properly. It looks like it's physically there, so it's good. Let's make a ceiling. We're going to cheat again. We're going to go into our starter content, materials, and we're going to find a ceiling. And I actually liked one of these ceilings. There we go. That had a nice little look. I'm actually going to go with the basic floor for the ceiling. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. And you know what? That's not bad. I actually like that. So we're going to copy this into our materials. We're going to change it from basic floor. We're going to call it to material ceiling. And then we're going to apply that to our ceiling. We'll go over here, apply that to our ceiling. And there we go. We have some materials actually on our scene. If we run through it, we have some walls, we have some floors. We have what looks like, we have a nice basic little maybe modern room and things like that. Now, if you're walking around and you see things like, look on the top of my screen where my floor, my wall, and my ceiling interconnect. As I go backwards, we're going to see a little bit of pop-in with light. This is due to our light map resolution. This is due to things such as our shadow distance and stuff like that. These are all settings that you would adjust as you are playing with your project, and you would work around them with different props and things like that. These are settings that are more advanced. So if you see them, it's not really an issue. Those are just things because we haven't fine-tuned our scene. This is going to wrap up our intro to materials. Actually, I apologize. Once again, I noticed that we don't have a material on our stairs. Let's go ahead and do that. I actually really liked the glass effect on the stairs. So I'm going to take our glass, put it over to materials, copy here. Let's call this one material stairs. And we're going to go ahead and apply this to our stairs once it's done saving. And there we go. Now we have clear stairs. Now there we go. We got clear stairs. That's good enough. Let me go ahead and wrap up this video. We've learned the basics of materials. We've created our first material. We've used some existing content. We've edited as we've needed to, and we've looked at some of our basic nodes. At this point, we have the basics of our room. We need to learn the next fun part. We need to learn what blueprints are, and basically, how am I able to move this character? And that's all controlled by blueprints. Those will be covered in our next videos.